I used to do loads and loads of running. Running is actually like, they call it a keystone habit. Have you heard this? It's a keystone habit. And what they mean by that is when you start running, it's not just one good habit. It changes all your other habits around it as well. So when you start running, you start going to bed earlier. You start getting up earlier. You start drinking more water. You think about the food that you're eating, so you eat healthier. You begin to drink less alcohol because it's not fun running when you're hungover. And so all of these other habits around it change. And then as you run as well, you get endorphins that kick in, which make you feel happier. They make you more positive, which then makes it easier to make new habits. And so this one act, this one habit is a keystone habit that changes all the other habits around it. That's pretty awesome, right? Yeah. I want to talk today about a keystone belief.
Go on.
I believe that there is something that if we believe it right, if we get our head around it, if we really, really understand it, it doesn't just stand alone, it doesn't just operate by itself, but it transforms all these different parts of our lives around it. In Titus it says that this one belief is the reason why people behave ethically. In Hebrews it says that this belief is what allows us to go through difficult times and still smile and keep on going back again and again and again. It gives us strength, it gives us endurance. I believe that when we get this, we become dangerous because nothing can stop us, nothing can stand in our way. And it's not that life suddenly becomes easy and there aren't difficulties, there aren't storms, there aren't trials. It's that we get this anchor in the middle of it all, which allows us to carry on through. But the problem with this belief is we don't really even talk about it. We don't like talking about it. And the people who do talk about it, to be honest, we wish that they wouldn't talk about it because they make it a little bit weird and a little bit awkward and a little bit difficult. And so we don't really know what to do with this belief. But this is what I want to talk to you about. And the belief that I want to talk about is our belief in heaven and eternity and what happens after you die. We've been going through this series, The Art of Being Human, and what we've been doing is we've been looking right back to the beginning, the story in Genesis of the Garden of Eden, and we've been asking ourselves, what does it really mean to be a human? What does it mean to have purpose? What does it mean to have vision, to have direction in our lives? What is our identity and how do we live well? And it's been, I think, really, really thought-provoking and challenging. Yeah. But the Bible doesn't actually operate like this particularly. The Bible doesn't look back to the start and say, what does it mean to be human? The Bible does the opposite. It looks forwards. It looks towards the end of all things and it asks the question, how do we live today in light of everything that is to come? What does it mean to be human actually has a lot to do with what we believe about where our lives are headed and where everything is going to go to. And this is what I want to explore today. And the truth is, I think that this is something that most people, we don't really understand at all. I'm not talking just about people outside the church, I'm talking about people inside the church as well. It's like we take most of our theology from The Good Place and like sitcoms and jokes and so then we create these kind of ideas of heaven that are basically fantasies. I read an online survey and they asked people, where will you go when you die? And out of 130 answers that I read, 128 said heaven. But if you were to ask them what they believe heaven looks like, they would have been completely different. And so I don't know where you even sit with this. Maybe you've created these ideas about what heaven is, or maybe you're a bit more like me. You're like, I don't even really want to think about this because I don't know what it is enough to be certain, and so I don't want to get it wrong. And to be honest, I just love my life right now. And so I don't want to be worrying about what happens next because I want to focus on today. And for me, sometimes, if I'm entirely honest, heaven feels like the consolation prize. Like when I die, at least it doesn't just finish there. I believe that something else is going to happen, but I don't believe it's as good as my life. And I just want to enjoy the things that I have around me. And I think that I get very confused about what heaven is really like. And the Bible doesn't always help us as much as we would hope, because it gives us really strange, weird imagery and metaphors about it. It talks about streets of gold, and it talks about houses being built out of jewels and diamonds. And I'm like, diamonds are see-through. I don't know if I want a see-through house. Like, that's weird, a little bit. It's a little bit weird. You're walking down your street, you're like, oh, hello, he's getting dressed. It's awkward. Like, why would I want that? It's like, it doesn't make sense. It talks about this idea of seraphims. Has anyone ever heard of a seraphim? Just put your hand. Do you know what a seraphim is? It's like a snake with like lots of wings. That's weird. What is that? Why is that in heaven? And what does that mean? And it's confusing. And I think that we're stuck in this position where our belief in heaven, the Bible tells us, will transform our lives. It transforms everything around it. In the book of 1 Corinthians 15, Paul is writing about eternity, and he says that if you take heaven away from Christianity, then there's nothing left. Then our lives are just foolish and despised, and none of it makes sense. He says the only thing that makes sense of anything that we do is heaven. And so how can we have this important thing that we just don't get and we don't think about and we don't understand? It feels like we're kind of stuck in between this place of wanting to know it and not wanting to know it because it's too elusive and it's too hard. And so really all I want to do today, I think, is spend a little bit of time looking at what we can know. What can we say from the Bible? What does the Bible tell us? And then I want to look at why it matters. How is it that our belief of heaven actually shapes our lives today? How is it that heaven, the eternity, the future, everything that's going to come, how can that break through into our present and transform everything? You up for this? You interested in this?
Yeah.
Good. So if you've got a Bible, I'd love to encourage you to turn to the book of Revelation. It's really easy to find. Just go to the end and it'll be right there. If you've got the Soulcity app on your phone, you can head into sermons and it will be there in sermon notes. I've got all the verses out ready for you. You can follow along, super easy. Or you can just have any other Bible app that you have available on your phone. And we're going to jump to chapter 21. And this is written by a guy called John, and he has this vision. So it's difficult language because it's a vision, and so visions aren't always quite straightforward, and we want to be aware of that when we're reading books like Revelation, that the word for this is prophecy, it's prophetic. He has this vision, and part of his vision we read today in Revelation 21, and he says this. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea did not exist any longer. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven like a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. I heard a loud shout from the throne saying, "Look, God's home is now among his people. He will live with them, and they will be his people. God himself will be with them. He will wipe every tear from their eyes, and there will be no more death or sorrow, or crying, or pain. All these things will be gone forever." And the one sitting on the throne said, "Look, I am making everything new." So what can we see in this passage? How do we make sense of this? And as I said, heaven is mysterious. And I've read a whole group of different books this week. I've looked at different scholars and different theologians. And I think that the only thing that they have in common is that they don't have much in common. They all have these different ideas. And I want to stand here humbly as well, saying there's a whole lot that I really don't get about this. But what they seem to agree on in this passage is that heaven will look a lot like a new heaven and a new earth. And this might be something that's new for some of you. This might be something that you've not heard before or not understood before, but it's generally agreed that what will happen is that there'll be a day when Jesus comes back to the earth. And then he will stay on earth for 1,000 years, whether that's literally exactly 1,000 years time or as a metaphor, we don't know. But there'll be this period of Jesus on Jesus on the earth. And then as the earth is disappearing, he will make a new heaven and a new earth. And the word heaven in this is not describing like heaven with angels and clouds. It's just the heavens and the earth. It's like the sky. So it's saying he will create this new creation. And so the first picture that we get is that there's going to be a time for every single one of us when we die. And then there'll be another period. And the Bible doesn't actually teach us a whole lot about this other period. It uses language like rest and waiting and sleeping. But then there'll come a day when we will be resurrected in a new heaven and a new earth. And this is going to be a lot like Eden. The picture is immensely practical. We will have bodies, we will have lives, we will have community, we will have work, we will have rest. And it's a good chance that the things that you love most in this life at the moment are likely to be there as well. You'll still be able to be bad at golf in heaven. If you're bad at golf now, that might be available for you. It looks like it's going to have all of these same things, with the exception that there'll be no sin, and there'll be no pain, and there'll be no suffering. And this is really, really hard for us to really get our heads around, because it will be earth and yet it will be completely not earth. Because we've only experienced a broken world. We've only experienced a world with pain, with darkness, with frustration, with war, with grief. Our lens of this world is broken. And so on the one hand, we know that it's going to be very, very much human. And at the same time, we know that we don't fully recognize it. I think it's a little bit like, I went to Wales a week ago with the family. We went on a holiday away. And at the end of the first day, we'd really done not much of anything. I think I played pool with Cole once. And he was like, "This is the best day ever." And I was like, great, low expectations. And then the next day we went to a mountain zoo, and he was like, "No, this was the greatest day of my life ever." And then we went to the beach and we had chippy, and he was like, "No, this is the greatest day of my life ever." And then we went up a mountain and we climbed and we explored and we got a little bit lost, and it was an amazing adventure. And he was like, "No, this is the greatest day of my life ever." And I think that we have these kinds of moments in lives where it's just full of joy, it's full of happiness, there's something amazing in it, and it's like a little bit of heaven shining on our lives. But the point is that we have the greatest day ever in our lives, but then when we get to heaven, it's just going to be like a whole nother level. It's going to be like, no, now we finally get it. This is it. This is the greatest day ever. And it says that this day will come, and all suffering will finish. All pain will stop. All brokenness will be made complete. I don't know what that looks like for you. For me, I don't run anymore because I can't run, because my knee went. And I've not been able to run in 5 years, but when I'm in heaven, I will run, because my knee will be made new again. My frustrations will be made new. My emotional struggles will be made new. Your mental health, the despair, the anxiety that you feel, the loneliness that you carry with you every day will be gone. You will be healed. You will be whole. You will be full. You won't have those worries, those problems. You won't have those frustrations. You will be you, as you were always supposed to be, as you were always intended to be. Every hurt, every struggle, every sorrow will be restored and redeemed. This is the picture that he gives us. And he says that the reason why this will happen is because God will once again make his home with us on earth. And he describes heaven coming down and meeting earth in this incredible way. God will literally be walking down the street. You will come and you will see him, and it will be face to face. And in that moment, you will be transformed. And everything will just make sense. Those worship songs will suddenly, they will make so much sense. You'll just sing out Amazing Grace. And you will sound like a black soul singer, because I believe in heaven that's going to happen.
Hallelujah. Yeah.
And when you meet God, everything in your life will suddenly be set straight. All of the questions, you'll suddenly see the answers clearly. Because in heaven, we will be fully restored. See, in the Bible, it starts with this picture of Eden, Genesis. And what I'd like you to do is take your two hands, your left hand, hold out your left hand like this. This represents earth. In this hand, it's everything practical you can see. It's mountains, it's rivers, it's beaches. And then in your right hand, lift your right hand out. This represents heaven. This represents God and life and love and goodness and everything that is related to God. And in the beginning, it was like these two overlapped. Bring your hands together. And earth and heaven were together. God was among his people, and it was good, and they knew him, and he knew them. And it was how everything was supposed to be. And he said, you're created to reign on this planet. You're created to make something amazing here. You're created to make a difference. But then what happened? We made a decision to turn away from God. And what was united was suddenly torn apart. And then heaven was separate from earth. And God was here, and we were here, and we couldn't find him. And the Bible says that we tried to find him in all kinds of places, but we couldn't see him. And so we found him in pictures of stuff, and we created things to fulfill that void. But it's because we turned away from God. And in the Bible, it's not even quite as separate as that, because the Bible tells us that God wanted to know his people, and so he made one place, one context, where earth and heaven could touch. So take your two fingers and put them together like that. There was one place where they touched, and that was the temple. They believed that the temple was where God lived. The temple was God's home on earth. It was a place where heaven and earth touched. So if you wanted to speak to God, you had to go to the temple. If you wanted him to do something for you, you would go to a priest, and the priest would speak to God for you. And then Jesus came, and the Bible tells us that Jesus came and he became the temple. In the book of John, it uses this phrase. It says, the Word became flesh and tabernacled among them. The tabernacle was like a mobile temple in the Old Testament. It was like a caravan temple. It just moved around the place. And so Jesus was described as this moving temple. And so all of a sudden, this temple, this place where heaven and earth met, was no longer static. It was no longer in one place. It began moving all around the place. It was like the temple came to you. And then Jesus says to his disciples, look, I want you to go. And I want you to spread this movement as well. And he died for our sins so that we could know God. And then what the Bible says is that we become the temple. There's a verse that says, your body is a temple. And what it's not talking about is going to the gym. It's not saying don't get a tattoo. It's not saying you have to wear certain clothes. That's not what the Bible means when it says you are a temple. What it means is that you are a place where heaven and earth connect. And everywhere you go, you take something of heaven into this world.
That's good.
What was one point of connection now, if you put all your fingers together, became this movement. All these different people moving around the world, different places where earth and heaven connect. It's why we can do church here in a cinema. Because it's not about the place. It's not about the building. It's about the temple. And we are the temple. So everywhere we go, we are church. Yeah. And we take it with us wherever we are. But what the Bible is telling us in this passage that we were just reading is that this isn't the end game. There's still too much that is broken. There's too much that's disconnected. But that there will come a day when this becomes this one more time. When we know God close, like we were always intended to. When every miracle is made complete and made eternal. When we are made alive once more and we can live out our lives. And when we get our head around this, it literally changes everything.
Yeah.
It changes absolutely everything. Because heaven doesn't just stay in the future. It invades our present right now. I was at a church a few months ago in Bradford. Me and Emma went. And there was a visiting speaker called Levi Lusko, and he told this story about his daughter, 3 years old, who had an asthma attack out of the blue. And she just dropped dead. And I'm a dad. I've got a 4-year-old, Leo. And I can't imagine how traumatic that must have been. All the hopes you have for that life, all of the investment that you put into that child, all of the dreams that you had for them, for then out of the blue them to just drop dead. And I'm sure we've all lost people, and we understand some of the trauma of the people who were close to us who are no longer here, and that hurts, and we feel the distance of that. And he was describing his story, and he said that the worst part of it was the forgetting. How every single day it was like his daughter was further away from him. And he said he realized that he forgot what her voice sounded like. He forgot her habits. He forgot her face. And he'd have to try and keep reminding himself, but he was like, she's fading away. And he read this passage out, which is found in the book of Hebrews, chapter 6, 18 to 19, and it says, hope is an anchor for my soul that travels beyond the veil. The veil is this idea between earth and heaven. There's this veil, and it says that hope travels all the way into heaven. And he said that when he read that verse, suddenly it was like the penny dropped, and he realized it wasn't that he was getting further away from his daughter. It was that every single step of his life was another step closer to the greatest reunion in history. That when you understand heaven, you realize that this isn't the end, but that there is more, that there's more ahead of us, and that the people who we've lost, we can be reunited with them. We can find them again, because this earth isn't all that there is. This life isn't the beginning and the end of everything, that there is more.
Amen.
Mom.
You see, I think that when we get our head around this, it transforms the way that we experience our lives. You might not be cash rich, but you are time rich. You have unlimited time. It doesn't matter what's happened before. You could have wasted your entire life up to this point, but you still have an eternity ahead of you.
Come on.
It doesn't matter how difficult, how frustrating, how painful your experience of life has been. It doesn't even matter if you spend this entire life fighting and you never get the breakthrough. You might never be healed. You might never see it all happen the way that you want it to, but the Bible makes this promise. It says that there will come a day that we can look forward to when everything will be made new. When you will be healed, when you will be full, when you will be fulfilled, it will happen. And so that gives us the strength to endure. That gives us the ability to keep on fighting. That gives us the optimism that even though I can't see it right now, and even if I don't see it for my entire life, I know that Jesus is working on my behalf. Yeah. And I know that he is doing something to restore the world to himself. And so even when I don't get it, even when it doesn't happen as I want it to happen, even when I lose my job, I fail my exam, again and again and again, even when my marriage doesn't go as I expected it to, I don't know what your life looks like, but you can keep on going. You can be comforted, because heaven comforts us today. But here's the thing. On the one hand, heaven is a comfort. On the other hand, for me, heaven is a discomfort. Heaven disrupts my present. It isn't the quietness that's in my heart, it's the unquietness which frustrates my heart. The more I look at heaven and the more I see how this world can be and how it will be, the less I'm satisfied with the world that I see around me. Yeah. The more I'm frustrated with my experiences. Heaven doesn't make me lie down and have peace. Heaven makes me frustrated. Because I can't unsee how this world is. I can't walk down streets and just go, hey, do you know what? This is all that there is and we'll just get on with it. Because when I get my eyes around heaven, I realize that this was never how we were supposed to be living. And I have to do something about it. See, heaven provokes me to action. It activates me. That passage I was talking about earlier, 1 Corinthians 15. Paul finishes that little section with this phrase. It says that there's going to be this period where Jesus reigns on earth. And that period is going to finish with him defeating our greatest enemy, death. That Jesus is going to come and he is going to defeat death. Death will be no more. And as I read that, I think that that's great and that's amazing. But what if death is our greatest enemy, what if the opposite could be true as well? What if you could be death's greatest enemy? Get your head around this. If death is our greatest enemy and we're frustrated and everything we see in life is tinged by death, and like they say it, don't they? The only things that you know are definitely going to happen in life, death and taxes. That's what they say. Death is our greatest enemy, but what if you could be death's greatest enemy? What if, because you know that there is eternal life, what if, because you recognize what life really looks like, you became death's enemy right here on earth? That you started to say, I'm going to stand up for everything that is life.
Come on.
So I'm pro-life in the most fullest sense of the word. I want people to flourish. I don't care if they're old, I don't care if they're young, I don't care what race or background or privilege they've got. I become pro-life because I just want to see life flourish. I stand against death in every single one of its forms. It doesn't matter how it comes. I stand and I want to fight against death. I want to fight against anything which is going to lead to death. Because I believe that we are made for heaven. And I believe that we are made for life. And so we can fight against anything that isn't life. The way it talks about this in Revelation is, it says that there will come a day when every curse will be broken. When we read the story of Genesis, when we pulled away from God, it says that was when curses entered the world. And the curses that we experience are working, but not in a healthy way. Working in a way that we're driven and we just have to keep on going and we'd never stop. It says that curse comes in the environment. And now that the world is cursed, and so we see brokenness in all of creation around us. It says as well that curses come in the relationships between men and women, that men will start dominating and women will start being under men. But what the Bible also says is that there will come a day when every single one of these curses is broken. I think that so often the way that we act in our lives is that we perpetuate curses. The way that we are with environment, we're perpetuating the curse. And when we actually get a picture that there's going to come a day when Jesus is going to make everything new, we get to make the choice. Am I going to step into perpetuating curses, or am I going to stand against them? Am I going to be somebody, am I going to be an agent of restoration? This is why I don't understand in churches why there's even conversations about women in leadership still. Because I'm like, you're not supposed to perpetuate curses. Yeah. We're supposed to be breaking them. Oh. We're supposed to be restoring them. Yeah. So I just want to say, if you're here and you're a woman and you've had somebody tell you that you can't do something because of your gender, I break that in the name of Jesus. In this place you can. You are completely equal. It's why we have women at every single level of the ministry, because that's how God created us to be. Yeah. That's what we see in the Garden of Eden. That's what we will see in heaven. And so we are going to break every single curse that we can. So you see, heaven doesn't just comfort us. It's not just something we look forward to. We don't just sit in this world and go, do you not let it burn because one day it'll all be all right. But rather we say, do you know what? Heaven can break through today. Yeah. I can be a place where heaven and earth is connecting. And that will change everything about me. We started this series with a question. And the question was, what is the change that you are doing with your life? What is the change that you want to see happen through your time here on earth? And another more blunt way of asking this question is, what's the point of you? Why are you here? What are you doing? And we started looking at Genesis for this question, but I just want to finish by pointing towards heaven. And saying that I believe that the answer to that question for every single one of us, if we know Jesus, has to be found in heaven. It has to be found in things that are eternal. It has to be found in bringing something of this. You know, Jesus' most famous prayer, he says, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth, just as it is in heaven. I want to ask you to just pause and imagine that. What will heaven be like? It'll be a place where there's no more fighting. There's no more knife crime. There's no more guns. It'll be a place where there's no more murder. It'll be a place where there's no rape. There's no abuse. There's no child abuse. There's no neglect. It's a place where there's no more inequality, when we're all equal. It'll be a place where there's no poverty of any kind. No poverty of finances, no poverty of food, no poverty of spirituality. We will all know God in our fullest sense. It'll be a place where every single one of us is made whole. Heaven will be a place where we can walk with God in the closest, most intimate sense. And my prayer is for every single one of us as a church that we will be a people not of earth, but of heaven. That as we walk around our towns, our cities, that we will feel like foreigners in a strange land, because we will recognize that we're not created for this. But that we can transform it. And we can change everything around it. Let me pray. Lord God, I want to pray that you'll do a work in every single one of us. I want to pray that you will fix our eyes on heaven. That you will show us eternity. And that will transform every aspect of our lives. That we'll look at our relationships differently in light of heaven. That we'll look at our finances differently in light of heaven. We'll look at our possessions differently in light of heaven. We'll look at our purpose differently. We'll look at our energy differently. We'll look at our relationships differently. God, we have this one time. We have this moment. Lord, let us make it count for something that will last for eternity. Stir us up, focus us, and help us to bring heaven here on earth. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth, just like heaven. Amen.